The Grand Debate Hall at Oxford University hummed with anticipation as cameras adjusted their focus and journalists tapped quietly on their tablets. The annual Science and Philosophy Summit had drawn its largest crowd in years, not just for the caliber of minds present, but for the promised intellectual collision between worldviews. On the left side of the stage sat Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, his familiar presence commanding respect even in silence, fingers interlaced as he listened to the moderator's introduction. Opposite him sat Dr. Marcus Harlow, the rising star of academic atheism, whose recent book, Delusions of Divinity, had earned him both acclaim and controversy. His precisely trimmed beard and tailored blazer projected the image of someone who left nothing to chance, neither his appearance nor his intellectual positions. We begin tonight's dialogue on the boundaries between science and transcendence, the moderator announced, her voice carrying through the packed hall. The initial presentations proceeded as expected, Tyson outlining the majesty of a universe revealed through scientific inquiry, while Harlow methodically argued for strict materialism as the only intellectually honest position. The true tension began during the open exchange, when Harlow leaned forward, his posture shifting from academic to prosecutorial. "Dr. Tyson," Harlow said, his voice carrying a hint of practiced incredulity, "I've followed your work for years and generally respect your contributions to scientific literacy. But I must confess my disappointment when I heard your recent interview where you suggested science might not have a monopoly on truth-seeking. How can someone of your scientific caliber entertain even the possibility of transcendent experiences beyond material reality? Isn't that precisely the kind of magical thinking we should be discouraging in a society already struggling with scientific literacy?" For several moments, Tyson remained silent, his eyes focused on some middle distance. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the defensiveness Harlow had clearly anticipated. "That's a fair question, Dr. Harlow, and one I've asked myself many times. Science has given us extraordinary insights into our universe, from the dance of subatomic particles to the birth of stars. I've dedicated my life to understanding and communicating these wonders. But I want to share something I've rarely discussed publicly," he continued, his voice softening. 10 years ago, during perhaps the most difficult period of my life, after losing my father and facing a health crisis of my own, I had what I can only describe as an extraordinary dream experience. A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. This was not the direction anyone had expected the conversation to take. Harlow's expression flickered briefly between triumph at having knocked Tyson off script and confusion at the unexpected turn. In this dream state, though dream feels inadequate to describe it, I experienced a profound sense of cosmic interconnectedness that no equation or theory had ever conveyed to me. I perceived, not with my physical senses, but with some other form of awareness, the underlying patterns connecting all phenomena in the universe. The hall had grown completely silent. Even the usual shuffling and coughing had ceased. Several cameras zoomed in on Harlow, whose crossed arms had unconsciously loosened as he leaned forward almost imperceptibly. "When I woke," Tyson continued, "my first instinct as a scientist was to dismiss it, to categorize it as nothing more than interesting brain activity during REM sleep. But something about that explanation felt incomplete. The experience carried a clarity and coherence that my typical dreams never possess. It left me with insights about certain astronomical problems I've been working on that later proved productive in my research. Did I encounter something transcendent? Was it merely an extraordinary neurological event? I don't claim to know with certainty. But what that experience taught me was that intellectual humility might be more valuable than absolute certainty. Perhaps the universe contains mysteries that transcend our current understanding rather than contradict it. What I'm describing," Tyson continued, "isn't an argument for any particular religious tradition or dogma, but it was an experience that reminded me that the line between the known and unknown isn't always as clear as we might like to believe. We know that 95% of our universe consists of dark matter and dark energy. Phenomena we can detect indirectly but don't yet fully understand. Is it so unreasonable to suggest that human consciousness might also contain depths and dimensions we haven't yet mapped?" The atmosphere in the hall had transformed. What had begun as an intellectual spectacle had become something more intimate, more authentic. Dr. Harlow adjusted his position, uncrossing his legs and placing both feet firmly on the floor. He opened his mouth as if to offer a rebuttal, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time in his public career, Marcus Harlow appeared to be genuinely reconsidering his approach. "Dr. Tyson," he finally said, his tone noticeably less confrontational, "I appreciate your candor about this experience. But couldn't we still interpret what you've described in purely neurological terms? The brain experiencing unusual activity during a period of extreme stress and emotional vulnerability." "Absolutely," Tyson nodded. "That's certainly one valid interpretation. And, as a scientist, it's the first explanation I considered. But here's where I think scientific humility becomes essential. If we claim that all subjective experiences can be reduced to neurochemistry, consciousness, love, aesthetic appreciation, the sense of wonder, we might be making a category error. It's like trying to understand a symphony by analyzing the chemical composition of the instruments." A soft murmur rippled through the audience. Harlow seemed to be wrestling with something internally. "But isn't that precisely what makes scientific materialism so powerful?" he asked, though his voice carried a new note of genuine inquiry rather than rhetorical challenge. "It gives us a framework for understanding phenomena without resorting to supernatural explanations." "Science is indeed powerful," Tyson agreed, "and I wouldn't be an astrophysicist if I didn't believe in its value. But the history of science teaches us something important about knowledge. It evolves. What seems inexplicable in one era becomes comprehensible in the next. Not because the phenomena changed, but because our frameworks for understanding expanded." "Let me ask you this, Dr. Harlow," Tyson said, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. "Have you ever had an experience that your current worldview couldn't quite accommodate? Not necessarily something supernatural. Perhaps an insight or connection that seemed to arise from somewhere beyond your conscious reasoning." Harlow removed his glasses slowly, a gesture that seemed to signal the setting aside of his public persona. "During my doctoral research," he began, his voice quieter than before, "I was working on a particularly difficult problem in evolutionary psychology. For weeks, I'd been stuck, unable to reconcile conflicting data sets. One night, I dreamed about my grandfather, who had died years earlier. He was a carpenter with no formal education beyond high school. In the dream, he didn't say anything about my research. He was simply working in his shop, arranging his tools in a particular pattern. When I woke up, I suddenly understood how to reorganize my approach to the data. The solution came to me complete, not as something I reasoned through step by step." He shrugged slightly. "I've always attributed it to my unconscious mind making connections my conscious mind had missed. But I'll admit there was something about the experience that felt external, as though the insight came to me rather than from me." "That's precisely the kind of experience I'm talking about," Tyson said warmly. "Not proof of any specific metaphysical claim, but a reminder that consciousness might be more mysterious than our current models suggest. I suppose the difference between us," Harlow said thoughtfully, "is not that I deny such experiences occur, but that I'm more committed to finding explanations that fit within a naturalistic framework." "And that's a perfectly reasonable position," Tyson responded. "Perhaps the most scientific position is acknowledging that the boundary between what we know and what we don't know is where both honest skepticism and authentic wonder can coexist. Neither blind faith nor blind dismissal serves the pursuit of truth." The simplicity and wisdom of the statement seemed to resonate throughout the hall. After a moment of reflective silence, Harlow leaned forward, his expression both serious and engaged. "I have a sincere question, Dr. Tyson. How do you integrate these kinds of experiences with scientific rigor? In practical terms, how do you hold both perspectives without compromising intellectual integrity?" "I hold them in creative tension," Tyson replied thoughtfully. "I don't claim certainty where I don't have it. In my scientific work, I follow the methodologies and standards of evidence our disciplines have developed. But I also remain open to experiences and insights that might eventually expand those methodologies. We live in a cultural moment that often forces false choices," Tyson continued. "Either you embrace science and reason, where you're open to transcendent experiences. Either you're a skeptic or a believer. But what if those dichotomies are themselves limitations in our thinking? What if the universe and human consciousness are complex enough to accommodate multiple dimensions of understanding? I've built my career on challenging what I see as magical thinking, Harlow said, his voice carrying an unexpected note of thoughtfulness. But perhaps I've been less attentive to the magic inherent in thinking itself. The remarkable fact that consciousness exists at all, that we can contemplate the cosmos and our place within it. In the weeks and months that followed, video clips from the debate circulated widely, not for their controversy, but for their rarity, a model of how people with fundamentally different worldviews might engage with mutual respect and genuine curiosity. Dr. Harlow's next book, published 18 months later, still advocated for a naturalistic worldview, but included a chapter called The Limits of Certainty that many reviewers highlighted as a significant evolution in his thinking. Years later, audience members would recall not the arguments presented that evening, but the rare moment of authentic connection between intellectual opponents. A reminder that the most powerful transformations often begin not with winning debates, but with the courage to remain open to experiences that challenge our deepest assumptions. This story reminds us that in an age of polarized discourse and rigid ideological camps, true wisdom may lie not in having all the answers, but in approaching life's deepest questions with both intellectual rigor and humble openness. The exchange between Tyson and Harlow offers a glimpse of what becomes possible when we move beyond debate to dialogue, when we seek not to defeat opposing viewpoints, but to understand them. Perhaps what resonates most deeply about this encounter is its rarity in our current cultural landscape. We've grown accustomed to seeing intellectual differences as battles to be won rather than opportunities for mutual growth and understanding. Yet it is precisely in these spaces of respectful engagement across differences that new insights emerge. If this message touched you, consider sharing it with someone whose perspective differs from your own. Perhaps it might serve as an invitation to the kind of conversation that doesn't end with agreement, but begins with genuine curiosity. Like this video, subscribe for more thought-provoking stories, and help spread conversations that matter. Conversations that remind us that the pursuit of truth is not a solitary journey, but one we undertake together, each contributing our unique perspective to a more complete understanding.